Hello YouTube, it's Andy again, and we're going to do video 3 of our print cost estimator app. And before we begin, we have to import some new libraries into our project that pertain specifically to room and life cycle, which I'll explain a little bit later. First, we're going to need to add this capped, and capped actually allows us to do compiler time debugging and implementation into our app. I'll show you kind of examples real cool with room as to why we want to use capped and why it's pretty cool. So I've already written the code for this lecture because I thought I was recording earlier and found out it wasn't. So everything is already done. So this should be a nice quick video for you. So we're going to first apply our plugin Kotlin-cat with a K. We are going to then add these implementations and API. So for the implementation, we're going to need the implementation and capped each for the lifecycle extensions and lifecycle compiler, and also the implementation and capped for the room runtime and the room compiler. And then also we're going to have some coroutines in here, so we'll need to import the API for JetBrains Kotlin X coroutines core and Kotlin X coroutines Android. And I'll explain what a coroutine is actually when we go into our database and our ViewModel and everything like that. So the best place I think we should start is probably our object. So this is what our individual table is going to look like in room. It's, if you want to think about it, it's more like a Java object, but it doesn't really look like a Java object. It's just kind of named that way. So if we were to have, like in a SQLite database, for each individual item, you'd do a POJO and with the getters and setters. This is no getters, no setters. This is just what the table looks like. In fact, it's an entity, and that's a SQLite term that is imported into room. So our individual file or items or individual tables will need to have the table built out with this @entity. You name the tables. So for this one, we're going to name it printer table. Sorry, you can't see that. So, and then why not? I think we're done. Okay, so then we need to specify this as a data class with our name, our primary key, which is going to be our ID, which is going to be a type of long, and then the rest of these are going to coincide with our spreadsheet. So if we go into here, pull up our spreadsheet, for our printers tab, we have basically our ID in this left, the name, what type of material, the price, depreciation time, service cost for life, per life. So that's taken in consideration that this is going to cost an extra $100 on top of the original price to repair in the 2,000 hours of its lifetime, and that's going to create this depreciation of 28 cents per hour to run, and that's basically all this calculation is here. But we're going to calculate this when we insert it into our database, but we're going to keep all this data anyway. So we're going to create a column for each item, including the depreciation time and service cost. And we're going to pre-populate the database with some information. So we'll hand code these in there, but when we create a new printer, we're going to do this calculation ourselves. So let's get onto it. So we have our name for the printer, the material diameter, the price, the depreciation time, service cost for life, energy consumption, and depreciation. And that's it. That's all you need to set them up. I've specified these as doubles. The material diameter needs to be a double because it's either going to be 1.75 or 2.85. The price, I left it as a double just in case somebody wants to add cents, like 7.99.99 cents, you know, every cent matters, instead of putting it as like an int of 800. Depreciation time, I'm just keeping the data types the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be. It could be an int and you convert it into a double when you're doing this calculation, but it's not a big deal. So I'm just keeping these as double for reasons of simplicity for calculation later. This energy consumption is also a double. If we go in here, it's in kilowatt hours per hour. So like how much it's gonna, what's the draw per hour of running the machine. And they're all pretty low. But you can see that some devices cost more to run than others. Like for instance, this CR10 has a larger bed, so than the Prusa i3 Mark II, so that would cost a little bit more to run because the bed is 300 by 300, and that you have to heat up versus a 250 by 210 that the Prusa i3 has. So that's the reason why the energy consumption is different, and that goes into consideration when we're doing the quotes, I believe. All right, so there we go. Here's our printer. We are then going to go into our printer DAO. So let me move that over here. And it's all the printer DAO is, it's a data access object. And it's an interface, and there's not much to it. All you do is you specify @DAO, and you're going to put your queries for each individual item. Now I'll add another one in the future when we get around to deleting, but for right now, all we need are 2 queries. This is going to be our query for when we want to get a list of all of our printers, and this is when we want to insert a new printer. And you don't have to specify this on conflict. You can leave it out because the default is going to be to replace it, but you can specify something else if you want to. There's different options there. And this is insert printer of type printer. But the cool thing, which is why we wanted to use cat, is this is inside of a string, and it's doing compile time checking. So if we put in here a printer table, and we need to order it by name, and that's pulling directly from our printer, because it knows from the printer that the table name is printer. So because we specified at entity, our compiler is looking for all the entities in our project. So here's the printer table entity, and it's going to allow us to select only the items from here, or it's going to throw an error. We can order it by name. So that's pretty cool. Another thing is live data here. I'll go over in a little bit in the very near future. But live data, we want to make sure these we're using live data for our data that we're going to put into our UI, because it's going to ensure that it's running on a worker thread and not the UI thread. And our ViewModel, which is here, which we'll go over, not quite yet, we'll go over our database next, but we are going to The live data, make sure that it's on a worker thread, and the view model, make sure that it is persistent throughout life cycles. So the two kind of work hand in hand. The view model is going to be the handler between the data and the UI, and the live data make sure that we're pulling stuff not on the UI thread. So that's why we have those two items. All right, actually I forgot to tell you the version numbers. So as of this video, which is still 3 minutes left of November 13th, the current versions of everything are, Kotlin version that this is using is 1.3.10. We don't need this navigation version. The lifecycle version is, well, again, we don't need that yet. We'll need these three down here. The room version is 1.1.1. The Arch lifecycle version is 1.1.1, and the coroutines version is 1.0.1, and those are being pulled from over here. So you have your coroutines, room version, and the lifecycle version. All right, and now we go into building our database. So this simplifies the SQLite database building by a lot. Before, we would need to write a SQLite open helper class, and this replaces all of that and makes it a lot simpler, because we're using a few assumptions with the entities, the DAO. That allows us to make our database pretty easily. All we need to do is specify at database, we need to import our entities. So when we go around to making our material and quotes, we'll add them in here. The version number is the database version number. So if you're publishing updates to your app, you're going to want to increment this and handle the incrementation. All right. So basically, we're going to reference this printer DAO down here later on. So that's why it's up at the top. What we're doing is we're making sure that our database is a singleton, and that's all we're doing here with this instance. And we're going to call this function getDatabase with the context, and this is the coroutine scope. Now, I actually I had never heard what a coroutine is, but basically this simplifies using threads. So it handles all of the threads and not lifecycle, but managing like worker threads with a lot less data. And it's basically, we're using our callback here, is where we're putting in this data. So we don't have to sit around and wait. This is all managed now with coroutines, and it's a lot less code and a lot cleaner to look at. But it is a little weird to look at first, so I'll try to explain it as best as possible. So our get database it's of type print cost estimator database. So then we're going to return our instance of our database object, and we're going to build it. So we need our context, the class, which is this class, what we're going to name the database. So our name is the print cost estimator database. Doesn't matter what you name it. Fallback to destructive migration, and then add our callback, which is going to be down here, and call build. So instance equals instance, and we're going to synchronize that. So our database callback, and this is where the coroutines plays a big part. And we need to put in our scope, and it's going to be of type room database callback. So our if you do the room with a view Kotlin, they override on open. We're going to do on create, because we don't want to keep repopulating this data every single time we open the database, right? So we can just override on create, and then on a dispatcher thread, populate our printers. So on our create, we're going to create a list of 4 printers, and that's the same exact 4 printers that are here on the Excel spreadsheet. So here we go. So we got our CR10. It has a 1.75 millimeter diameter. It costs $450. Expected to depreciate over 2,000 hours with an extra $100 of service cost, and it consumes 0.15 kilowatts per hour. And so the depreciation for the CR10 is estimated to be 28 cents an hour. Okay, so same thing for our Prusa, Ultimaker, and Multec Multirep M420. So that's all we did, is we're just inserting these 4 items into the database when we create it, so that we have some data there to actually display on the screen, and then the user can just keep them or delete them. We'll write the delete code in a little bit, but not quite yet. All right, so next is our ViewModel. Now the ViewModel also uses these coroutines to handle what thread we're going to be doing the data to UI. So this is going to be handling all of that lifecycle independent. Oh, actually, you know what? I am sorry. This requires our repository. So our repository is where we're gonna, all we do in here is specify all printers is a type of live data, and we get it from printer DAO, all printers, get all printers. All right. Because we're passing in our DAO in here. And all we're doing here is this is going to be suspend, just means that it can be at a later time on a worker thread. We're going to insert printers into our list, not on the UI thread. So this repository is not actually part of the room libraries, but it's recommended to use a repository. So then when we go into our ViewModel, here's our repository. So we're going to create a job. It's a coroutine job. We need our context, and the dispatchers is going to handle all of the threads. So that's basically what it is, the job plus dispatchers. That's the context on how you write it, or that's the nomenclature, sorry. Our scope, which is our coroutine scope, and our repository. So then, oh, and our printers, right? Our list of printers. So we're going to initiate this class with our printer DAO, and that's our print cost estimator database .get database, which takes an application and scope, and we're going to get our printer DAO, which we specify right here. Right here. So db db.printer.DAO, which up here, sorry, our function up here. Next, we need to initialize our repository with our printer DAO, and then specify that our printers is repository.allprinters, which we just created right here. And then we have a function for inserting printers, and that's this insert function that it's going to make sure that it's done on a worker thread, which we're not using right now, but that's what all of this scope, using the coroutines and everything like that. But when we get around to populating a new object or a new printer, we're going to be using this ViewModel and notifying dataset change and repopulating the list. And it doesn't matter what the life cycle of our fragment or activity is in. We can rotate it and it'll still populate the new list and everything. But what we want to make sure is that once we've inserted our items, or once everything is completed, we cancel our job so that we free up memory. All right, so now that our room stuff is all set up, let's start populating the data, start having a UI. So this is 2-item row, and it's basically a materialized version of 2-item row that is now deprecated. So basically all it does is it uses relative layout, and it's just 2 text views, the first text view and second text view. I borrowed this from a much larger view that had an image here and an image here, and since there's no images yet, we can add them later, but since there's no images right now, this should be sufficient. All it is 2 text views with some padding on the left and eventual padding on the right, if these were long enough. Alright, so that's just our layout. Text views right here. And so now we're going to build our adapter, and this is going to be a RecyclerView Adapter, and when it takes in our view holder, which is this inner class printer view holder, and we need to name our text views, so that's what we're doing here, and we need to call item view, which is going to be inputted in find view by ID, and we have our first text and second text. So what we're going to put into our first and second text goes down here. We need to get our printers and find out which printer to display, and that's what this current is. So holder.printername.text is our current printer, and we're going to pull out the name. And then in our second line, so our holder.printerMaterialSize.text, we're going to set it to the current printer material diameter, which is a double, so we need to convert that to a string. And then this is going to be called when we add a new printer. So that's what's when we update our printer and the live data. This is just going to call notify dataset change. The adapter needs to know how many items to display, or how many items to manage, and that's going to be however many printers we have. So printers.size, and all we need to do is then specify in our onCreate view holder our view. So we have our layout inflator. So our item view is inflator.inflates, and here's our 2-item row. Pull the parent, and attached to root is false, and we're going to then return our item view, which then gets called here, then it gets called here, and we need to know how many. Okay, so now we can start populating data in our fragment, and this is all new code. I've now also added this new instance of a fragment, and it's just best practice to do this companion object. As you can see, it doesn't actually get called, but it's for memory management on like a blank fragment. So every new instance of this fragment. So you can add it. It's best practice to do so, but the code will run without it. So we need to specify our adapter, and we're also going to use our ViewModel. Okay, so our recycler view, we need to set the adapter. So RecyclerView.adapter is equal to adapter. Our layout manager is equal to linear layout manager with get activity. And we're going to do has fixed size because all of these should be the same size, and this improves performance. So then now we need to specify our view model. So our view model, this is what hung me up for a little bit, is how to do this, because in the sample for room with a view, it's done in activity, so you don't actually need any of this. You just start straight here ViewModelProviders.of. But what we're doing here is telling the activity to run this code. So ViewModel providers of activity gets printer ViewModel, and here's an exception that we could throw. It won't throw because this activity has to exist. So it's just debugging code, but you don't. We have to include it, but we don't need it. This is actually going to just populate here. For some reason, we don't have the activity. It'll throw this, but we will. So just, you can put whatever text you want in here for debugging purposes. So then we take our view model. We're going to set our ViewModel.AllPrinters.observe. The owner of it is this, and we're going to observe with return of printers, and we're going to tell our adapter to set it as printers. Okay. All right. I know that's a lot, and it's a little weird looking, but for our view model and our coroutine, so that's what this allows us to delegate on different threads our printers, and it's going to observe for changes. It's going to observe for life cycle changes like a rotation, resuming, or whatever. Anything that the activity does that would normally mess up your data is all handled by the view model, and that's all we're doing right here. So now we are all set. When we run this in our app, you don't have, since if this is the first time you're running it, you can delete the app and reinstall it, but it's going to create the database now on the first time we run this. But any changes we make to the database in the future, delete the app and then reinstall it if you're going to keep the version number as 1 before you publish or release. Once you release something and you update it, you're going to have to increment that version number, but you can just delete the app from here while you're testing. All right, so our quotes are still blank. We haven't built any of that code yet, but the next one is our printers. And look, we got our 4 items. That is so cool. Our data is populated. It is working beautifully, and soon we'll be able to add new items to our printer list, and we'll also write the code to delete items. Okay, so hope you liked this tutorial. Hope it's useful to you, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build the same thing for materials, and then next thing we're going to do is the quotes. So the quotes depend on the printers and materials, so we can't build it until we've already got our printers and materials. So I'll probably pre-write the code for the materials and just show you the updates. It's a lot of the same code from this, just modified for materials. I'm just going to show you where I'm going to pre-populate the data, how to call it, and everything like that. So it should be a pretty short video for that. The quotes is going to be a little bit longer. All right, so hope you like it, and have a good day. Take care.